In heaven, everything is fine. You've got your good pods, and we've got mine. I'm young, dumb, and full of creamed corn, Matisse Van Rossum.
I'm your resident pencil neck, Ben Sheets, and in heaven there is no beer, and that's why we drink it here.
And I'm everybody's favorite bedside bonsai, Cleveland Mosier.
And together, we are America's finest podcast, The Pod People. And we're back at you with another review. And this week, it was my choice. And because I've been thinking about going somewhere that's nicer than this reality, somewhere that is fine, I decided, hey, let's watch Eraserhead.
And fine it was.
And for those unaware, Eraserhead is the 1977 feature-length debut of David Lynch, written and directed, starring Jack Nance, Charlotte Stewart, Judith Roberts, and Laurel Neer. And the movie is about
the anxiety of parenthood.
Yes.
Yep.
Among other things.
Feeling weird and disassociated.
On that subject, Cleveland, this was your first time ever seeing Eraserhead, right?
Yes, it was.
Well, before we dive into the nitty-gritty, I would love to hear some of your initial impressions. How did your first viewing of Eraserhead strike you?
I adored it. I loved this movie. Man, I was actually really surprised to hear that this was David Lynch's first film.
That's right.
Christ almighty.
He spent like 3 or 4 years making...
5 years.
5 years making this movie.
It shows. It's such a clean film for as gross as it is. Like, it's so well thought out and consistently terrifying and nebulous. I've been thinking a lot this week, as we watched it a few days ago. I've been thinking a lot about what it was about this film that I loved so much that I didn't love about something like The Greasy Strangler or, several other films, which I know I keep bringing up that damned movie.
You want to talk about Hausu?
I was going to actually bring
Hausu.
up The Greasy Strangler in context of this film as well, but please continue. I want to hear what differentiates Eraserhead from The Greasy Strangler for you.
I have some nice answers. The key one is The Greasy Strangler, as campy and goofy and weird as it is, still feels relatively grounded in reality, even with the bad acting. We're in an understandable environment. We're seeing things we know and don't like, and I don't like that. Whereas with Eraserhead, I'm seeing things that I don't understand, and that are made to make me feel uncomfortable. And because of that, I'm left searching for the root of them, their meaning, or in their non-meaning. I'm searching for, it leaves me unraveling the puzzle. And also, because it's so nebulous and because it's so strange, it's puerile fantasy. It's something that I can distance myself between. Whereas some of those other discomfort films are just a little bit too close for comfort. For discomfort, I should say. Too close for discomfort is a good way to put it. Eraserhead is fantasy. And because of that, I can appreciate the workmanship of discomfort. I can enjoy the things about it that are making me uncomfortable, and I can laugh at them, and it's at gunpoint. It's still, there's a lot of, it's tension-fueled laughter. But I don't mind being held there, I suppose.
That's interesting, because I would agree somewhat with that, but I think with a lot of David Lynch's stuff after this, it's much more closer to reality, but oftentimes it's just as strange, and I think it's just as effective regardless of how nebulous it is. On top of that, I've seen this movie probably a dozen times at this point.
Same.
And I feel like every time I see it, it feels like the story itself and what it's trying to say is more and more straightforward. Maybe that's just because, I've had plenty of time to think about what everything is trying to say and what's going on, but...
Well, I think the narrative itself is very straightforward, cut and dry, beautifully simple, even. You can break down the core components of what happens in this film in a couple sentences. But
would y'all be surprised to learn that the script for Eraserhead was only 22 pages?
I wouldn't be.
Despite the fact that the film is 90 minutes?
Right, and that is sort of, I think, what I mean when I say nebulous, is that so much of the film, or so many of the events aren't necessarily about, oh God, how do I phrase this? So much of what we see is visual metaphor. It's not what's actually happening, quote. It's, us cycling back and, catching on like the broader themes and the metaphors of what's actually happening before we dial back in. And even when we dial back in, it's still like weird and, feels like German expressionism. Even like the non-dream sequency stuff is obscure and weird.
Yeah, well, I would say the entire film plays like a dream. Just in general, the whole thing is like one big dream sequence.
Yeah,
David
the
Lynch,
dream sequences are really dreams within dreams,
right?
At that point.
David Lynch, of course, a surrealist, maybe the most famous, maybe most mainstream American surrealist filmmaker. And while Ben brings up a good point that like Lynch's later stuff is more grounded in reality and dreams intercede, I would say that like something like Eraserhead, the whole thing feels like a dream. And it turns a lot of people off. It's very slow, it's very weird, but that's what I love about it so much, is because it plays out like a dream. And when you're dreaming, you don't question the logic of the dream. You don't understand it at the time, but you accept it blindly.
Right, you can just buckle in and enjoy the ride.
I think David Lynch does a great job, emphasizing just buckling in.
Yeah.
And going in for the ride with a lot of visual gags in the movie.
Yes.
For example, when Henry goes to the family's house for dinner, but in the background there's this really gross sounding noise and suckling.
Yeah, I thought it was rats.
And you think it's just like weird esoteric sound because the whole film, we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, but the soundscape of this film is incredible. Yeah. But then you get a cut to what the sound is actually coming from, and it turns out to be diegetic sound. It's, a dog being...
with a litter of puppies. Yeah.
It has such a positive association. Like, if you were just to show someone the image of that, they'd say, oh, that's really sweet and wonderful.
But the sound makes it...
Yeah, and hearing
gross.
the sound first, like it takes the sacred elements of a litter of puppies, and it makes it profane by giving us these horrible sounds first. So you hear the sounds, you go, ugh, what is that? Ugh, it's a litter of puppies. Ugh, just the worst. And yeah, there's a perversion there. It's fucking cool. It's a neat move.
You have another case of that a little bit later when the girlfriend is leaving Henry's apartment because she can't stand all the crying, and she's pushing against the bed frame over and over. And it's very absurd.
Repetitious.
Yeah.
It goes on for a really long time.
And finally, she pulls out a big suitcase from under the bed.
But it's not even that big for like how long she was pushing up against the bed, which I love. There's no reason for her to be like pulling against it like that many times. It's something that you'd see like a lunatic do, like someone, who has like a tic and they just keep repeating themselves, and she just kind of keeps like repeatedly pulling it out from under the bed.
I think that's one of the fingerprints that you see in something like The Greasy Strangler. As difficult as that movie was for me to watch,
No, I think you're right, though.
I think that the filmmakers were 100% influenced by Lynch, and this movie too, I think specifically. Like that endlessly repeated thing of like trying to pull the the suitcase out from under the bed, or like at the dinner table when like the little chicken is like spewing blood, and his girlfriend's mother is like having like a weird kind of sexual seizure almost, being constantly berated with this like bizarre repetition that is funny at some times and not funny at other times.
The idea that Lynch is trying to imply with that is don't sweat trying to figure out every symbolic, metaphorical meaning in every little detail. Just buckle in for the ride. It'll make sense eventually.
Well,
you know.
Lynch has famously, for his entire life, refused to answer questions about this movie because he doesn't want there to be an explicit answer for what it's about or what you're supposed to take from individual scenes and stuff. He wants people to get what they get out of it, and that what his intention was going into it doesn't matter. Lynch is a very enigmatic personality in general, but I think that kind of like mystique around this movie in particular, where he's been much more explicit about other films he's made, it's like there's really something special about this movie because of that.
Well, and that's one of those things where it could be a total cop-out with a lesser director.
Yeah.
You know, but I think this movie, as abstract as it can get at times, it isn't terribly ambiguous. Like, it seems pretty clear what everything is going for in terms of the symbolic meaning. A great example of that is the first sequence we see going through space, and you see Jack Nance, Henry, floating, and weird, almost sperm-like things.
Alien sperm.
Yeah.
Superimposed coming out of his mouth
Yeah.
and being like released into the universe.
And there's the man pulling levers.
The man in the planet.
Yep. You know, that's the idea of conception. The man with the levers is God.
Yeah.
Essentially, and the
Pulling
sperm.
the machine.
Yep. And the sperm, you know, hits the planet and causes the drastic measures that unfold the rest of the story.
Yeah, a lot of folks have described this film as an adolescent's fear of responsibility and parenthood. I would agree with that reading. That's the one that makes the most sense to me.
So many things in this movie, you know, point towards that and are very fruitful when reading that interpretation.
Absolutely.
One of the very apparent details in that is how this world is super industrial and dystopian almost. You know, it's huge factories, you know, mounds of dirt.
An ambient drone that accompanies the entire film.
Pipes,
the sound design is incredible.
Pipes and
but,
tubing everywhere. And the whole idea of that is, how could you bring a child into a world that's decaying in face of ecological destruction, dystopia? That's very
Poignant.
yeah, of this world, you know, it
Yeah.
feels very relevant.
Well, and, you know, Henry has an ex-girlfriend, you know, contact him out of the blue and invite him to dinner. And, you know, there's the very real fears of, like, meeting a significant other's parents and being interrogated by them. Mary's mother, like, straight up asks Henry in the hallway, like, did you and Mary have sex? Which, like, oh my god. every dude's nightmare, being asked that at their girlfriend's house. Then being saddled with this monstrous and deformed baby and being forced to try to take care of it. Henry's on vacation, man. This is his time off. And that's why I think in many ways Eraserhead is the ultimate dudes rock movie.
Excellent.
Because
Excellent.
when it comes down to it, it's really about how all these bitches are coming to Henry and forcing him to be responsible and be an adult and take care of a baby when really he just wants to fuck the girl across the hall. And you know what? I think if Henry wants, he should be able to do that, god damn it.
Well, that is a take.
Satire. I feel the need to say that because everybody takes everything on the internet so seriously.
I think that there's much to that, and having the hindsight of finishing the film for the first time, I largely agree. While I was watching the movie, I did have one other take. And
please,
not a differing take, but one that's compounded with that. So like the themes that we've already explained, all still there in this take.
There are literally no wrong answers with this movie.
True that. In the moment, I was reading so much of the film as a play on perception. We're essentially seeing the world through the eyes of someone unstable, being our protagonist. The reality we are seeing is the one that he perceives. So when the parents are asking stuff like, did you two have sex? They're not actually asking that. That's him perceiving that. That's him sitting at a completely normal house and getting a look from the mother that he reads as that. Because, what's the fucking politically correct word to use?
Great question.
What, schizoid tendencies?
No. Insert politically correct term here, but people with mental illness, like misinterpreting, information. In some cases, being schizophrenic or whatever, and hearing your own inner monologue sort of fueling the conversation, that the other people aren't privy to, and you having sort of a conversation with yourself as opposed to, what the conversation that's actually occurring. It's often stereotyped as the crazy person on the street who's, why are you looking at me like that? You think I'm stupid or something, when the person's like, no, I don't at all. That idea. I thought we were seeing the world from a person like that's perspective. And so whenever those events were occurring, they weren't actually occurring that way, just as how he saw them. So that allows for essentially all of the visual metaphors to function in a tangible world. It allows for the dreams to be interpreted the way they are. Any visual metaphor is just the way he's processing data. I didn't see the man pulling the levers as God. I saw that as his inner mind, who's really running the machine upstairs, and just the upstairs wasn't the machine in reality,
exclusive.
The machine of his mind. And I agree. I think so. That's part of the beauty of the vagueness, even with there being direct intent. We can read that David Lynch had intent with everything he did because each aspect of the film, whether it's the weird bedside plant or the
yeah, and the loose pile of dirt. There's so much loose dirt and pine straw in this movie.
The bleeding chicken, all those things are so front and center because this film is so largely minimalistic. The sets are always very clearly sets and constructed in that same German expressionist sort of way. Mm-hmm. And so intent is on everything. Because it's so sparse, generally. We know that there was some reason to put that there. And often, I think that the reason is just to make you feel unsettled, but it's done with such fantastic utility, always. I'm just gonna keep harking back to the weird bedside plant. That was one of the things that really caught me, because it's just so perfectly wrong.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed too, but framed behind the bedside plant is a small photograph of a nuclear explosion, a mushroom cloud, which I think there's plenty of ways to interpret that detail. Is this perhaps a post-apocalypse kind of scenario, or is that meant to represent the destruction in his psyche, being forced on him through all of a sudden this responsibility. And I think the idea of the man in the planet being his mind or the man in charge or whatever is an interesting idea because the film ends with kind of an annihilation, which if you use that reading could be you know, the last remnants of his sanity breaking, the annihilation of his subconscious, because like we see the man in the planet with the levers breaking and sparking, and then it all just kind of whites out, you know.
Yeah, and like killing. Spoilers for the end of Eraserhead.
For
at this point,
fucking 40-something-year-old movie now.
And I'll say, if you haven't seen it, I was glad it wasn't spoiled for me. There's a lot of tension built up around, I think, how the film climaxes.
Yeah.
So, forewarnings, for real though. Killing the monster baby doesn't kill God. Right? Like when the machine starts sparking and like the guy's face is kind of melting and shit. That's why I like that read. Exactly. Because that translates for me. Like that translates as his inner mind. You know, like that's the moment when like he hits total instability and would likely need to be committed.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Well, like the baby is representative of everything that's wrong in his life, like this whole situation. And it's like especially because like the mother is negligent too and keeps leaving because she can't stand the crying, to have him like attack the baby at the end and like try to destroy this symbol of like what has ruined his fucking vacation. You know, it leads to that breaking point, that annihilation. I think that's an interesting read, one that I have not so much subscribed to before, but I can get down with it.
Nice. And again, too, I think that's a read.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answers.
Right, like that's the beauty of allegory. I think in this circumstance, you can look at an Alphonse Mucha and say, okay, this piece is an allegory of spring, you know, and these flowers represent springtime, and these symbols, you know, represent fertility and springtime in his work. In the same way that like the bedside plant or the atom bomb photograph, you know, can represent like life and unease and death, you know, and like endings as well. Like we all know it's built around like the allegory in this case. I would say like instead of like an allegory of spring, like Eraserhead is an allegory of discomfort. Like everything in the film is designed to feel wrong. You know, like it's wrong, it's alien, something is always off. The punchline is something is wrong, and we're just trying to figure out what it is, which is great because the song is Everything is Fine.
Yeah, it's an implication that somewhere other than where you are right now, in heaven, everything is fine.
Yes.
Right here,
it's a very good point.
It's not fine. Everything sucks here. And that's why I think he has that obsession with like staring into the radiator, and this weird like cherub-cheeked woman in the radiator who sings that song, is that like he's pining for heaven where everything is fine.
I want to make sure that I heard the lyrics right, but at the refrain the first time she says, "You've got yours and I've got mine," but the second time does she say, "I've got yours and I've got mine"?
I think it's you've got your good things.
You've got your good things, and I've got mine.
mine.
And then the second time, it's you've got your good things, and you've got mine.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. It changes, if I remember correctly, and like it's a
Yeah, that's the difference. The first time it's I've got mine, and the second time you've got mine. That plays in perfectly with the ending after like the destruction of the planet and whatever, and the fade to white. We then see Henry in a all-white space embracing the woman in the radiator, and then cut to credits. So somehow through the destruction that he wreaks at the end, that he has in some way transcended to a place where everything is fine.
And what better way?
And I wish I could too, man.
Well, but see, here's the thing, though. Someone who has lost their sense of reality to the degree where they have to be committed, you know, can achieve bliss. You know, it's that. I think it's that same idea where it's like he's achieved heaven by checking out of reality. His brain is shut off, you know, and
bliss
he's
through
just,
oblivion.
Exactly. That's not a heaven that I want personally.
You don't want to be with the lady in the radiator?
No, she's got weird cheeks. Not to judge, not to body shame.
Body shame.
But little bit with the cheeks. What weird makeup. What a great choice, because you can't tell if they're like cheeks, but they're kind of hairy.
No, I think it's paper mache, so they're kind of like textured.
Yeah.
They're kind of...
It's a really unfortunate texture in all the best ways.
It's great. Yeah, I love the lady in the radiator. I love that the first time we see her in that scene with just like the Fats Waller organ music and just like the little spermy things falling from the sky onto the stage, and she's just kind of like walking around stepping on them.
Oh yeah.
Which is like her destroying preemptively all like the possibilities of further conception.
Right.
Yeah,
Of
which
further
is
So
why
clearly in
so-
in heaven, like in other words,
Yeah.
like get rid of the child and like you can find
Right.
heaven.
I think it's so great that we're introduced to her with that, because at the end it feels like once, he's killed the baby, he's gone with her.
Right,
you
exactly.
know, and she kills future life and keeps it from happening.
Right.
And on that note too, like I think the lever is being broken, where at the beginning, the levers being pulled was bringing upon life. The lever is being destroyed, very much can symbolize the destruction of life.
Yeah, break
And-
the machine that creates life. So, because I mean, ultimately, heaven is just where you don't have any responsibilities, no bitch girlfriend, no whiny baby. You just get to hug a lady with big cheeks, make those cheeks clap.
Oh yes, and oh no. Oh man. By the way, I did look it up, and you were correct, Tease. It is the first time it's everything is fine. You've got your good thing, and I've got mine. And then the
I
second
know I
time
was
it's
correct.
everything is
I've
fine.
seen this movie many
You've got your good
times.
thing,
Yeah.
and you've got mine.
Yeah, we've both collectively seen this movie
Yes.
probably like 24 times
Yeah,
or so.
yeah, for sure.
One thing I do want to expand upon a little bit is we've been talking about kind of interpretations of what's going on.
Themes, yes.
And I think that's a really important word, is themes. I think this movie is a really interesting exploration of open-endedness versus ambiguity, because
Good
I think this
point.
movie is very open-ended in that there are very direct themes, the anxieties of childhood, the subjective lens, and subjective
Being horny for your
experiences.
neighbor.
Yes, but it's not ambiguous. It's open-ended to what these things mean, but it's not unclear. You pick
Yeah.
up what I'm putting down there?
I am. I think one element that helps with that is that same idea of intent and sort of giving the viewer a call to action. Every time something is placed in front of you, it is placed in front of you with the goal of inspiring you to try and understand it.
Yeah, like David Lynch has in all of his stuff incredibly meticulous intent. And I think if you compare a movie like this to something like Hagazusa, similarly, very bare bones narrative, not much dialogue, lots of visual storytelling, so on and so forth. I think the difference is that while Eraserhead is very slow and quiet and weird and not particularly explicit, the intent is so clear in everything that even if you don't know the answer, that there is something that you can read into it.
Somewhere out
Whereas-
there is an answer.
Whereas with like Hagazusa,
Or there are
I
many
felt-
answers.
I felt so much of it as like there's no intent to this beyond that looks really cool.
Well, and I think a big other thing about it is there's a through line.
yeah,
A through line of these themes consistently through the film.
Yeah.
Whether it's looking at the events of the film subjectively through Henry's lens, or I should say, because it's very much both, the anxieties of becoming a father and having a new child. Those are through lines throughout the entire film. It doesn't stray at all, pretty much,
Right.
from those ideas, where Hagazusa is all over the place with, its ideas.
I have a great metaphor for this. I think that'll really help bring that
Go
point home,
for
too.
it.
Eraserhead is like a Lego set, and how it does it successfully, right? It's one of those like bin Lego sets, that is just like a bunch of cool pieces, and it's castle themed. I'll plonk that down in front of you and say, hey, build a castle with these pieces. And you can sit down and you've got all the pieces you need. There's little horses, there's fucking matriculations and other cool castle-y bits and flags and stuff you can stick on it. And you can build a castle out of it. Say, cool, I did this. Like, you gave me these pieces and I built something out of it. And then I can plonk that same Lego set in front of you, Tease, and you'll also build a castle, but a little different, right? You have the pieces you need to build something. You have the themes and the elements, but you can shuffle them around. They have multiple
meanings. You can put the
meanings.
pieces together in different ways.
Right, exactly. Whereas, like, something like, say, Hagasusa, like, one of the key problems being, like, with that film is that some of the themes never are fully tied together. Like, especially with the direct ending, which isn't open-ended. Like, that I feel like I'm being given, like, a bundle of sticks to play with. Now, I can still have a lot of fun with a bundle of sticks. I still like that movie. But I'm the old man who's like, no, when I was a kid, I had a bundle of sticks to play with, and I had fun with it anyway. Like, I'm that old man, but I still think it does help bring the point home.
I think,
it's like, you can't
were you
necessarily
playing,
build the
like,
same thing with it.
one-man fetch as a kid?
Throw a stick and then go pick it up. I think another big part of that too is that Eraserhead has direction in that same way. While it's very abstract,
The direction is castle themed
right,
set.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like it is moving in a direction. There's a lot of room to move out from that, but you're always kind of like being carried down a channel like a river or something. Whereas like Hagazusa feels, for a lot of it feels quite directionless. Like it's just kind of ambling in one direction until it then decides to amble in another one, you know? And then it gets to the end and it's like, okay, I got here, but why am I supposed to care about how I got here? And with Eraserhead, when you get to the ending, it's like, oh, okay, word, yeah, like everything was still carrying me in this direction to this point. What I want to talk a little bit about, too, and then we can start getting into like production design and sound design, stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah, there's lots to talk about.
But the explicit dream sequence,
The titular.
Eraserhead, yes, where Henry has a dream where his head comes off of his body and falls from the sky and is picked up by a little boy who takes it to a factory where they dig into his brain and turn his brain into erasers, hence Eraserhead. That, I would say, is one of the most, at least for me, most open-ended or ambiguous parts of the movie, where I always really enjoy that sequence, but I have a hard time nailing down exactly what it's trying to say. I'm curious to hear what you guys pull from that sequence, because I do have something.
I think it actually harps on what you brought up earlier. The only way I can read it, until I hear some other interpretations, of course, is the only way I can really read it right now is it's him seeking oblivion, seeing his head, like, or his brain as emptiness, like is seeking heaven. It's seeking that, like, that opportunity to check out, to go back on vacation. That's the only thing that I really see it as, and that is how the film ends as well. That's how I would.
I have a similar read, but
I think
what do
it's
you think,
really
Ben?
important to think about the context in which it happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's with the lady in the radiator when he loses his head, correct?
Right, and the baby's head comes up out
Yes, and
of
the baby's head
hole,
comes out.
yeah.
And, you know, the lady in the
Replacing
radiator, before that was shown, you know, destroying these sperm-like creatures.
Yeah.
So I see it as new fatherhood brings these ideas of legacy, bringing a child to carry on your seed and your opinions and ideas down generations. And in the destruction of the new spawn, the new seed, whatever, the baby, you know, you see his destruction directly. And not only that, but you see his brain being taken and turned into erasers, and, you know, symbolizing his thoughts and ideas literally being erased with time as things go ahead.
Okay, so when you erase your legacy, you erase yourself.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm very into that. I'm very into that. And again, once again, what's cool about that is both those things work in conjunction with each other.
Yes.
One does not single out the other, which is dope.
And actually, my reading of that is kind of a synthesis of those two ideas. What it says to me is that his brain being turned into an eraser is that, like, his mind is focused solely on erasing the mistakes of the past, i.e. not fucking wrapping it up before he tapped it up, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? But, like, using his brain to erase, like, the black marks on his life, his mistakes that are ruining his fucking vacation, you know? I love that whole sequence, though, aside from, like, what it stands for. Just, like, the two guys in the factory, when the boy comes in, the one guy at the desk like, keeps hitting the like, bell button. Just, once again, the repetition, just going on and on and on and on. And finally, his boss comes out of the back, just, "Okay, Paul!" One of my absolute favorite moments.
One of the best lines in the movie.
That's what I love about David Lynch. Like, it definitely comes out in other stuff like Twin Peaks and shit, but, like, as weird and dark and, like, creepy as his shit is, he's got such a sense of humor.
Oh, yeah.
He's got such a good sense of
throughout
humor.
all of his stuff, you know.
Well, Mary's dad, when he goes to dinner, her dad is great. He's also one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, he's a
Look
champ.
at my knees!
No, it's so true. Like, and it's that same idea. The levity allows for the dark to be darker.
Yeah.
And it gives us a moment to breathe and gives us a roller coaster ride with hills on it instead of just a flat roller coaster.
Right.
Usual fare. Yeah. Mixing it up, good. Comedy with tragedy, good. Like,
Right.
You know, I'm a fan of that.
And in a
I think
movie,
most people are.
In a movie like this that is, like, so anxiety-inducing, because I don't know about you guys, but, like, no matter how many times I've seen this movie, it always is just, like, for the whole thing, just making my stomach churn. Just, like, I'm so uncomfortable.
Well, yes, I think we should emphasize this is one of the most atmospheric, immersive movies out there.
For sure.
As abstract as it is, if the world feels very tactile due to the fantastic sound design and the fantastic production design, it feels like a very textured place. Yeah, it emphasizes that sense of unease and dread so much.
Black and white is so good for that.
Black and white is excellent for that. And I think the other thing that really pushes that to 11 is the baby. I think we need to talk about the baby.
I was going to say, we've spent a lot of time talking about this film thematically and what it means and what it's trying to say, and I think that is the perfect transition into talking about the more technical aspects of the film being made. David Lynch had his fingers in a lot of pies in this movie. He wore lots of hats, similar to our collective friend Seth Ickerman from Blood Machines. David Lynch wrote, directed, produced, and did the production design and the special effects for this movie.
Yes.
He did everything. Very, very small crew.
I would have used Clive Barker and Hellraiser as a.
But he didn't do the special effects. He just wrote and directed.
That's true.
This is a way better example of doing all of those things than Blood Machines, because he's actually good at all of them.
Or The Room.
The Evil Within.
Or The Evil Within. Yeah, so David Lynch did all of that stuff. And I bring that up because one of my favorite, like, Hollywood stories is that nobody really knows how he made the baby in this movie. He's never told anybody. There are some people say that it's like an embalmed calf corpse, like a baby cow.
That's what I thought.
But nobody knows for sure, and nobody knows how he articulated it either, how he made it move, really what it was made out of. And after the whole thing was over, he took it out to some unknown location and buried it in an unmarked grave. And at a wrap party, they had a wake for the baby. Yeah. So somewhere out there in this large country of ours, there are the 40-year-old remains of whatever the baby in Eraserhead is made out of.
Honestly, I'm surprised that there isn't documentation of it more just for legal purposes because of how much it really does look like a baby calf. The special effects creators on like John Carpenter's The Thing, for instance, were brought to court over the dogs, and they had to prove that they were just puppetry and there weren't any like actual animals.
Well, I mean, you can order like fetal calves and stuff,
sure,
like, for like scientific purposes, and those have been preserved in formaldehyde, so it would hardly be illegal if he.
Oh no, an alien used like actual animal parts and stuff, but yeah, as long as it wasn't alive, because like the articulation's really good.
It's really good.
It's puppetry, though. I think we can say it. Well, it has to be.
It's for sure puppetry, but he didn't even let the cinematographer like look at the footage from when they were like setting up the shots with the baby. Like he made them like turn on the camera and turn around while they got everything set up and running, and then like, okay, you can turn back around and look at it. Like David Lynch did not tell anybody how he made this baby. And I love that because even fucking 40 years later, it's an absolutely wretched prop. It's disgusting.
In all the right ways.
And it moves so tactilely.
Yeah.
Especially the eyes. The eyes have such articulation.
The eyes are what bother me the most because they look fucking real. They look like animal eyes. And, it's so slimy and gross, and there's obviously some air circulating through it because, like, its nose bubbles with, like, mucus, which is, so gross. I hate the baby in this movie.
I first saw this movie when I was, like, 12 or 13, probably.
God damn, way younger than me.
The baby gave me nightmares, for sure. Because of how articulated things like the eyes and, even some of the minor movements it has, it feels so real. I love how it's introduced in the story, too. The mother says that they don't even know if it's a baby. Or
if it's alive, right? Do they say?
Well, no, she says there's a baby, and then Mary comes up crying and says they don't even know that it's a baby. And Henry says, like, it hasn't been long enough for us to have had a baby.
It fits perfectly into that sense of anxiety with new parenthood because, a lot of parents, I'm sure, when they first have the baby, when it's still covered in, gross shit and refuse, like, it doesn't look like a baby.
Yeah. Well, and also just like the fear of your child being born with like some kind of physical deformity.
Yeah.
Apparently, David Lynch's daughter was born 3 years before they made this movie, and apparently, like, when she was born with really bad club feet that required a lot of surgical operations to like make it so she could walk normally as a child. So I'm sure that some of that bled into the making of this movie.
Good Lord, right? What you know, man. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
And like the baby's cry is like so grating. Like infants crying is already like we're instinctually tuned to like find it displeasing, so we like try to make babies stop crying. Like but this is just like, it's so pathetic but also just like repulsive. And I love too that like later on, like before he kills it, like it laughs at him.
Yeah.
Like he's being mocked by his own baby. It snickers at him, when he comes back into the room.
Yeah, there are accounts of people being tortured via the use of like repeated sounds, like such as babies crying, or like the same song over and over again and stuff like that, like been placed in confinement. And one of the auditory hallucinations that comes out of using like the sounds of like crying babies like nonstop to torture someone is you start to hear voices. Like you start to hear it like saying things like at you and stuff. I think that comes through so well in that laughter there. Like it's that same idea of like just you developing this auditory hallucination over like this like repeated torture of, you know, hearing this thing cry.
Well, the baby continually, like, manifests his fears, too. Like, the baby has been, like, crying all night, so he goes to, like, take its temperature to see if it's sick, and that's why it keeps crying. And he takes his temperature, and it seems fine, and he turns away and turns back to it, and all of a sudden it's covered in, like, pox and boils, and it's, like, labored. And he's just like, oh, you are sick. It's like he thought it was sick, and it all of a sudden manifested itself being sick.
Right.
And
that idea of like your perception of things, like and hyperbolizing that stuff, like comes through there so well. Once again, with that same theme I brought up earlier.
Yeah. We should also mention when he goes to cut away the baby's bandages and reveal what's underneath all of that, and it's just loose guts, which is really fucking gross. Obviously, like, real animal guts. And he just stabs it with the scissors, and it just starts bubbling over with so much creamed corn. Just corn on corn on corn, baby. Corn baby.
Yeah, that whole sequence is so wretched. Just unbelievably
It's drawn out,
disgusting
too.
and horrifying.
Because it takes him a long time to, like, cut all the bandages off, and like as soon as he starts cutting, the baby starts like seizing and gasping, and
what's so great about it is it ties in perfectly with the tiny chicken carving.
Yeah, exactly.
At the table. Like those scenes mirror each other in that first off, he said he got the chickens like they're man-made.
They're man-made, yeah.
Is what he said, which makes no sense. He asked him to carve into them. So we have Henry sitting down like with a knife and this tiny baby bird, right? Like cutting it open, pre-cooked. But before he can even cut into it, it starts leaking out, right? Like assumedly like filling or blood. And the mother starts having what can really only be described as an orgasm. And that idea of killing for release, like comes into play, like eating to survive, you know, almost having to kill this creature because like it's in such pain is horrifying and very cool because once again it's that same idea of like checking out Finding Heaven, that release, having an orgasm, like those are all similar things and they all play into each other. So I like how that scene mirrors the ending.
It's gross too.
Extremely.
It's real nasty. I also like the giant baby head that they built that sort of like moves around his room, like with the strobing of the lights, like after he's punctured the baby, the giant head.
Big one.
Apparently he and Jack Nance built that in his backyard together, which is pretty cool. While we're on the subject of production design, Jack Nance has like the best hair in this movie.
Wow.
Iconic haircut.
Truly.
Which is basically the haircut that David Lynch has been rocking for his entire life. So I don't know if that's like kind of a self-insert. But apparently, because it took them 5 years to make this movie because they kept running out of money and the production kept being halted for various reasons. And Jack Nance kept that haircut for 5 years.
Whoa.
He never cut
dedication.
it. Kept it for the entirety of production. So he's just walking around LA with that hairdo, just like when he wasn't on set.
That's so cool. That's crazy.
Apparently, also, I was reading that Lynch, for about a year, slept on the set of Henry's room.
Oh, just to get a feel for that. Yikes.
Well, just because he didn't have another place to sleep. Like, he was putting all of his money into making this movie, so to cut costs, he just slept on set in fucking Henry's room with all the loose dirt and pine straw and... Awesome. That holy blanket, and I don't know if they kept that baby on set. I wonder if that thing had to be refrigerated. If it was made out of like actual animal parts. So spooky.
Yeah, we'll just never know. I want to know what actual color some of those fluids are because they're so rich. and black and white. I love how much of a world of texture you open up when you remove color, because it just allows you to really focus on just those key shadow elements.
Yeah, I'm so glad this movie's in black and white. I can't imagine it in color.
No,
I don't know what it would be like.
not as good.
I would argue that you have an analog in color from David Lynch in Inland Empire, the final movie he's made
Yeah,
so far.
The most recent.
As of 2020.
and that came out in like 2006.
Yeah. Obviously not counting Twin Peaks,
Yeah.
because that's a TV show. It's interesting seeing him kind of start and end his film career with two of his most experimental works.
Yeah, Inland Empire is definitely that. Very, very different from Eraserhead. Way, way longer.
They're almost foils in some way. You know, while they
Yeah.
have the through line of being extremely experimental, you know, one is in color, one is in black and white, one is shot on film, one is shot very digitally, one is very tightly paced, the other is sprawling and full of sidetracks and dividing pathways. And I would definitely recommend everyone to explore David Lynch's whole filmography.
I'm excited to after this. Well, careful when you say whole. We're also, because the other David Lynch films that I have seen prior to this one was Dune.
Yeah, we don't need to. You can do without exploring.
That one's directed by Alan Smithy.
That's right. Not Dune. You can Dune without that one, if you know what I mean.
And isn't there another? There's something else that I have seen of his.
The Elephant Man.
The Elephant Man, which is great.
That was his film after this. It was actually this film that got him that gig. Mel Brooks, who produced The Elephant Man,
Of all people.
right, saw Eraserhead and offered the job to David Lynch.
Awesome.
And I sure am glad he did, because The Elephant Man is awesome.
Yeah, that's a masterpiece.
If I remember correctly, I remember hearing an anecdote about how Stanley Kubrick showed Eraserhead on the set of The Shining.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
He wanted the whole cast and crew to get in the right headspace for shooting a horror film.
The right Eraserhead space.
Exactly, the right Eraserhead space. He thought that Eraserhead was like a perfect example of like oppressive atmospheric horror, which is what he was trying to go for in The Shining. So it was part of his required viewing for everybody who worked on that, which is interesting because I don't think I would have drawn that parallel without knowing that anecdote. But I can see the influence, I think, and at least in terms of like the use of sound and the use of atmosphere in The Shining.
Absolutely.
Do we want to talk a little bit about the sound design in Eraserhead? Because it's like such an enormous part of the movie.
Absolutely. Well, it's it's very much drone and industrial, very much brimming with sound collage. Lots of metal clanking and whatnot.
Well, I think it's interesting because there's not a ton of dialogue in this movie, but it's never silent. Like, there's always something. And I think that same attention to detail is with the rest of the production design is, like, really there in Eraserhead. The Foley is incredible. I think of the part where they first bring the baby home, and and his girlfriend is like taking up all of the space in the bed and like sort of like thrashing around in her sleep and making these really gross, obnoxious sounds with her mouth while she's sleeping.
Like clicking her teeth.
Yeah, like clicking and grinding her teeth and like smacking and like shoving him up against like the edge of the bed. The sound of the lady in the radiator stepping on the little spermy things. So gross. I love the sound design in this movie. You could teach, I think, a whole sound design class using like just Eraserhead as an
Absolutely.
example.
I really love the choice of music too. The organ and the lady in the radiator song. It feels very, I don't know, 50s, I want to say.
The organ stuff is all Fats Waller.
Yeah.
As we saw in the... I actually didn't realize that the last however many times I saw this movie. Spotted that in the credits this time.
It feels like a through line in a lot of David Lynch's work, you know, the throwback to earlier times, whether it's in Blue Velvet, where it's very much a throwback to 50s in a lot of respects.
Yes, the corruption of the white picket fence narrative.
Yeah.
Keen to see Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet rules.
Very high on my list.
Blue Velvet's great. We'll have to do that for the podcast at some point. I love Blue Velvet.
Here's a question for you, Tease.
Yeah.
You've seen a few David Lynches at this point, David Lynch movies.
All of the big ones.
I definitely wouldn't point people to this one as an entry point for people who haven't seen David Lynch's stuff, just because I think it's a little too esoteric for a lot of audiences.
Yeah.
Unless you're Cleve, which I think he can handle. Well, no, sometimes he can handle experimental
Elephant Man.
stuff.
That's the first one I saw, and I think for me, and I love that movie, and because it's grounded, like it's approachable, the narrative makes sense, and has a powerhouse like cast.
I assume you're asking what I think would be the best entry point
Yes.
for David Lynch. I actually disagree about The Elephant Man. I think The Elephant Man is a great film, but I think that it's not indicative of David Lynch's style.
No, yeah,
So
I agree.
while it's a much more digestible film than something like Eraserhead, and a fucking masterpiece as far as I'm concerned, like The Elephant Man is definitely worth watching. I think if you went into David Lynch's filmography with The Elephant Man, you're like, oh yeah, okay, I can get into this guy, and then you watch something like Eraserhead or Inland Empire after that, you will be shocked, I think,
Yeah.
by the disparity. I would honestly say the original series of Twin Peaks from the 90s, because I think that it has a lot of the grounding of like the kind of soap opera kind of stuff, but a very, very healthy dose of Lynchian dark surrealism.
What I'll say for your average viewer is, when I was like 18 or 19 or so, tried to watch Twin Peaks without knowing what I was supposed to expect or wanted to expect or whatever. I was just told it good, and I sat down and tried to watch it, and my taste was very different back then. That was way back in the past, fucking dinosaur times or whatever. But I think, well, I know when I tried to watch it then, I couldn't get through the pilot. I couldn't get through the first episode because I found the wailing to be obnoxious.
You're just telling on yourself now.
But I'm very keen to go back and try again now with my very different perspective. Because I think you can probably already see an arc of taste from my first appearances on the podcast, I think, to now. Like, even in that short of a time, like, y'all have exposed me to so much stuff that I normally wouldn't have gone out of my way to watch.
We're doing you some learning.
And damn right, and it's appreciated. And yeah, just so I think coming from that perspective, like, I think the secret is just if you're gonna go in for like 90s Twin Peaks, stick with it.
For sure.
I think is the answer, and like the payoff is very good. I assume. I hope to try it myself at some point, and I hope that it is. But
if I had to say like what feature film of David Lynch
I would say Blue Velvet. Yeah, I think Blue Velvet, in a lot of respects, is similar to Twin Peaks in that it carries that line between surreal and weird and straightforward and of this world. It really rides that line well, and I think the through line of the mystery of that film would definitely make it more digestible for common audiences.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think Blue Velvet feels like Lynch warming up for Twin Peaks.
And I think Blue Velvet's a great entry point if you haven't seen any of David Lynch's stuff, because you can see both avenues of his work, and you can say, hey, I like the more normal stuff, and then you can go, watch stuff like The Elephant Man or The Straight Story. Or you could go, I like all the weird stuff, and you could go watch Eraserhead and Wild at Heart and all of his other stuff. Yeah.
Oh, man. I love David Lynch.
Me too.
I think that feels like a good place to wrap things up. Do you want to go ahead and rate Eraserhead? Do you have any other points that you want to touch on first? I think we dug into this one pretty deep.
Oh yeah, we carved into that chicken.
Oh yeah, we did.
Just to say that I love the sex scene.
Oh, with the neighbor across the hall.
Yeah, like descending into like the weird puddle in the bed was awesome and wretched.
Gives a whole new meaning to waterbed, am I right?
Oh. What about it?
I guess I'll start with this one since it was my pick. Don't need to rehash much of what I said. This is, I think, required viewing for a lot of reasons, but especially if you are a lover of abstract surrealist film, or honestly, even as a horror lover, like I think the fingerprints of Eraserhead are all over the horror canon. It obviously influenced many, many filmmakers, Kubrick included. Yeah, this is a cut and dry masterpiece. I'm going to give it 5 out of 5.
Yeah, this is an easy 5 out of 5 for me. Honestly, this would very likely go into my top 10 favorite horror movies of all time. I think it's an incredible film. David Lynch is one of my favorite directors. It's one of the most immersive, atmospheric movies of all time, and the sound design is fucking awesome. Yeah, it's one of a kind. There's really no other film like it.
Ditto that. 5 out of 5 from me for all those reasons.
Cool. Well, that's a unanimous 5 out of 5 for Eraserhead. It joins the hallowed halls of the Golden Pods, and I think it is a well-deserved place.
I have a question.
Sure.
We've done 120 something episodes so far, give or take.
110
100.
officially, closer to 140.
Okay,
Yeah.
So, of that many, how many golden pods do we have so far?
Under 20, I think. It's probably like...
Well, I guess we've done 140 episodes, but some of the episodes have multiple films. We've probably done close to 200 films at this point, I would say.
I think so.
On the show. Yeah, in Golden Pods, 10 maybe?
I have the list. Let me...
Yeah, instead of conjecture, let's let Ben pull it up.
Because I'd be curious to know, because I think it says something about like our distinctive tastes.
This would be 16.
Oh, okay. Wow, more than I thought.
Yeah, so from Poughkeepsie Tapes to Eraserhead.
Nice.
You know, with the whole spectrum.
We run the gamut. And I'm sure we will add more over time. But yeah, for close to 200 films that we've reviewed on the show at this point, 16 have been unanimous perfect scores. I think that, yeah, it's good.
Those seem like the right numbers to me.
Speaking of the right numbers, I'm trying to get some numbers in my pocket, if you know what I mean. So, Cleveland, who is sponsoring the show this week?
This week is brought to you by Corn Huffers Chocolate Chicken. They're tiny. But careful who you cut them around.
A guaranteed aphrodisiac.
Yep.
Corn Huffers chocolate chickens. All right. Well, next week we're going to be doing another guest episode. Our friend Hannah will be making her sophomore appearance on the show. You might remember her from way back when we talked about Get Out, back in like 2018, I think. So Hannah is coming on next week, and her choice of film to discuss is The Sixth Sense.
I was trying to think about the Get Out episode, and then I realized that was before my time.
That was well before your time. Yeah, that was... I think Ben was even out from that one. I think that was me, Eugene, and Hannah on that episode.
I have to go back and re-listen.
Right around the time we were moving.
Yup. Damn, time fucking flies. Yeah, that was one of the last episodes we did in Milwaukee, I think. But we're very excited to have Hannah back on the show next time and to talk about yet another Shyamalan classic. And join
The Sixth Sense is twists. Sight, smell, taste, feel.
And twists. Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm very excited for that episode. Haven't seen The Sixth Sense in a long time, so that will be a fun one. So tune back next week to hear us joined by Hannah for The Sixth Sense. And until then, if you like the show, hit the 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, leave us a nice review, share an episode with a friend, spread the good spooky word of the Pod People. You can also follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod and at letterboxd.com/PodPeoplePod, where you can find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those episodes. And you can check out our list of now 16 golden pods, of which Eraserhead is the latest. So you want to see what else we thought was perfect film? Go check it out. You can follow me on Twitter at Deep State Aussie.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheets.
And I'm occasionally tweeting for Light Arc Studio as we work towards putting out the next big chapter of It Stares Back. Come check us out. We're on Steam in early access. And if you like the art, or you just like art in general, come and check out my art station. Just search Cleveland Mosier, and it should pop right up. And if you like that art as well, hit me up for a commission, baby. I can make some paintings for you.
If you're a D&D player or any tabletop role-playing game player, Cleve's been doing a lot of character portrait commissions lately. Yeah. So if you want to see your role-playing character realized in excellent detail, then I recommend hitting Cleve up. He does very good character portraits.
D&D characters, Pathfinder characters, you name it, your tabletop character, or perhaps the character of a book that you're writing or something. You want to see him come to life, hit me up. That's my job.
If you want to see some dirty pictures.
Oh yeah, if you want your weird fanfic to just become real in front of your eyes. If you want that
if you want to get nasty,
that weird Rule 34 that you always wanted to see, hit me up. I charge lots of extra, but I'm a sellout, so go for it anyway.
All right, well, that'll bring us to the end of this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Check back with us next week for another exciting review. And until then, just remember, if you want to stay on vacation forever, wrap it the fuck up.